There's a particular kind of silence that fills a childhood bedroom when you return to it as an adult. It's not the silence of peace, it's the silence of ghosts. And I've spent the last 3 days sitting in mine, listening to those ghosts whisper all the things I've never quite said out loud. I can hear them in the creak of the floorboards, in the way the afternoon light filters through these windows at exactly the same angle it did when I was 17. There's something almost cruel about how unchanged this room is, how perfectly preserved, like a museum dedicated to a person I spent half my life trying to forget. My name is Olivia, and I'm 35 years old. I live in a city that's 3 hours away from where I grew up, in an apartment on the 14th floor of a building that touches the clouds, in a neighbourhood where nobody knows my father's name or my mother's maiden name or anything at all about where I came from. The apartment is all glass and steel and minimalist furniture that costs more than my parents' car. I've spent the last 18 years building this life like it was the only life worth having, the only life that mattered. And yet here I am, sitting on a bed that still has the same lavender comforter I chose when I was 15, staring at the door my mother used to open without knocking, wondering why I ever left in the first place. Or rather, I know exactly why I left. What I'm struggling to understand is whether I was running from something or running towards something that never actually existed. Let me take you back. I want you to understand this completely, not just the surface of it, but the whole weight of it. I grew up in a town called Millbrook, population 7,843 when I left. Probably about the same now, maybe a few hundred less. It was the kind of place that existed in a pocket of time that felt separate from the rest of the world. The high school football team played at the same field where my grandfather played, where his father probably played before him, and where generations of boys would play after us. The town had one traffic light, 3 churches, and a hardware store that had been owned by the same family since 1952. The main street had a diner called Rosie's that served the same menu every day, had served the same menu for about 40 years. My mother used to say the breakfast special on Wednesday was bacon and eggs. That was every Wednesday without fail. It was the kind of place where everybody knows your mother's maiden name, your father's job title, and exactly what time your lights go out at night. My mother always said it was cosy. My father called it community. I, at 17 years old, called it a prison with a welcome sign and a smile. I remember the exact feeling of suffocation. It's hard to describe to people who didn't grow up in a small town, but imagine living your entire life in a fishbowl where everyone is watching, everyone is interested, everyone has opinions about your choices. My mother taught at the high school, so I couldn't even escape her at school. She taught sophomore English, and while she didn't teach my grade directly, her presence permeated everything. Teachers would mention her, students would talk about her. There was this constant awareness that I was her daughter, that I should be like her, intelligent, engaged, involved in the community, that I had certain expectations to live up to. My childhood wasn't traumatic in the way that word usually implies. There was no shouting, no cruelty, no dramatic betrayals that would explain my need to flee. There were no stories I could tell that would make people nod and say, "Oh, that makes sense. That explains everything." That's actually what made it harder. My parents loved each other, loved me, provided for me in every measurable way. They took care of my physical needs, my educational needs, my emotional needs as best they understood them. My father was a carpenter who smelled like sawdust and coffee. He'd been a carpenter for 38 years, taking over the business from his own father. He was respected in the town. People called him when they needed something built or fixed, and he had a waiting list that stretched for months. My mother was a high school English teacher who remembered every student's name, even years later. She would run into former students at the grocery store, and they would light up, genuinely happy to see her. She'd ask about their lives, their families, their current jobs, and you could see on their faces that she actually cared. She'd been teaching for 32 years at that point. She had colleagues who'd been there with her for the entire time. They went to lunch together on Fridays. They planned their lessons in the same break room. They were good people. They still are, and somehow that goodness became a weight I couldn't carry anymore. I was different from them in ways that felt fundamental, essential, like the core of my identity was in opposition to everything they represented. Where they found contentment in routine, I felt suffocated. Where they saw beauty in stability, I saw limitation. Where they were satisfied with knowing one place deeply, I was desperate to know many places. I was the kind of teenager who stayed up late reading about cities I'd never been to, whose heart would pound when she looked at maps, who felt physical pain when thinking about my 18th birthday, because I knew exactly what I would do the moment I could. I would leave this place behind and never look back. I'd lie in this very bed, the one I'm sitting on now, and read travel magazines and books about other cities. I was obsessed with New York, with the idea of it, with the stories of people who moved there and became someone new. I'd read biographies of writers and artists who'd left their small towns and come of age in big cities. I felt certain that my real life was waiting for me somewhere else, that there was a version of myself that was trapped here, pressed down by the expectations and the familiarity and the endless routine of it all. My parents never understood this about me. I don't think they could have, because they had both grown up in similar environments and had chosen to stay. My father took over his father's business. My mother came back to Millbrook to teach at the school she'd gone to herself. They had genuinely made peace with staying. They didn't see it as settling. They saw it as belonging, and I couldn't fathom how anyone could be satisfied with that. I remember the night I told them. It was a Sunday in October, just before my senior year of high school. I was sitting at the dinner table, pot roast, green beans, mashed potatoes, the same meal we'd had every Sunday for approximately 800 years or so it felt. My mother had prepared it the way she always did, with the green beans just slightly al dente, the potatoes buttery and salted perfectly. The pot roast was tender enough to cut with a fork. It was a good meal. It was exactly the same as every other meal we'd had in that dining room. I set down my fork. I remember doing this very deliberately, making it a gesture, wanting them to know that something was shifting. "I'm not going to State University," I said. My voice sounded strange to me, like it was coming from somewhere outside my body. My mother looked up. My father continued cutting his pot roast. "I got accepted early admission to Whitmore University," I continued. Whitmore was in a city 3 hours away, more than 3 hours if you wanted to be precise. Whitmore was ranked well. It had a good scholarship program. I'm going to go there, and I'm not going to come home on weekends. My mother's hand froze halfway to her mouth. I remember this so clearly. Her fork was raised, a piece of green bean on the tines, and it just stopped there, suspended. My father set down his fork with a precision that suggested he was counting his breaths, trying to modulate his response. He was always very careful with his words, my father. He would think before he spoke, which I had always interpreted as him being slow. But I understand now that it was the opposite. He was being thoughtful. "I see," my father said quietly. That's all he said, just those 2 words. "I see." My mother tried harder. She always did. She set down her fork carefully and folded her hands in her lap, a gesture I'd seen her use with students who were struggling. The gesture that meant I'm listening, I'm taking you seriously. "You could go to the State University," she said gently. "It's only 45 minutes away. You could still come home on weekends. You could still be involved in things here. Still see your friends." I shook my head hard, the way a person shakes their head when they're trying to dislodge water from their ears. I didn't want to come home on weekends. I didn't want to be close enough to feel the pull. I wanted distance. I wanted it desperately. The way a person desperate for air wants a window. The way a person drowning wants the surface. "I need to be somewhere I can really live," I said. And I remember the cruelty of that implication, that here with them I couldn't really live, that their life, their choices, the world they inhabited was somehow less real, less valuable, less important than the life I imagined waiting for me somewhere else. My mother set down her napkin. She didn't eat much after that. She picked at her food, moving it around her plate, and my father and I continued eating in silence. There was so much I could see happening in that silence. The disappointment, the confusion, the hurt that I was causing and didn't know how to stop. "We're proud of you," my father said eventually. "You know that." I did know that. And that made it worse somehow, because their pride felt like a cage made of gold, beautiful but still confining. "I'm proud of me too," I said, and there was something hard in my voice. I was 17. I was convinced that I was enlightened, that I understood something they didn't, that I was choosing growth and they were choosing stagnation. We finished dinner in silence. My mother cleared the plates. My father went to his workshop in the garage, the place where he spent most evenings working on restoration projects or building custom pieces for people in town. And I went upstairs to my room and looked at my acceptance letter again, reading it like it was scripture, proof that somewhere else, I was meant to be. I did leave. I got into Whitmore, and then I got a job that took me even further, to a city 6 hours away, and then eventually to the city where I live now, where I've built this careful, intricate life that is deliberately, meticulously designed to be nothing like the life I grew up in. I became someone efficient, ambitious, cosmopolitan. I dated people who didn't know my family history, who didn't know that my mother taught high school or that my father built things with his hands. I wore expensive clothes and worked in a field, digital marketing for tech companies, that would have made no sense to my father. I learned how to code switch so completely that when I did call my parents, I sometimes forgot how to speak to them in a way that felt natural. We developed a dialect between us that was careful, polite, distant. The years moved forward with the inexorable force of a river. I was 25, living in a studio apartment with a roommate named Derek who worked in finance. I was 28, in a one-bedroom, promoted to senior account manager. I was 30 and I'd met someone, a man named Richard who worked in venture capital, who took me to expensive restaurants and talked about investment opportunities. I was 32 when Richard and I broke up because he couldn't understand why I didn't want to go back to my hometown to meet his family at the same time. Couldn't understand why I was so resistant to the idea of family events, of togetherness, of anything that felt like it might trap me. I had relationships that didn't work out. I had promotions and rejections, moments of doubt that I never shared with anyone, especially not with my parents. I built a carefully maintained exterior that suggested I had figured it all out, that leaving had been the right choice, that I was happy and successful and exactly where I was supposed to be. During these years, my contact with my parents became rhythmic, predictable, and incredibly shallow. I called on Mother's Day and Father's Day. I sent Christmas cards with a brief note. I visited for exactly 4 days in December and exactly 4 days in the summer, arriving with a rental car and a predetermined departure time. I would stay at their house, sleeping in this room, and we would all pretend that I hadn't spent the rest of the year completely disconnected from them. When I was home during those visits, I was physically present, but mentally elsewhere. I would check my work email constantly. I would scroll through my phone. I would make excuses about needing to prepare for a meeting or deal with some work crisis. My mother would ask me questions about my job that she didn't fully understand, and I would respond with patience that felt a lot like condescension, though I didn't mean it that way. Or maybe I did, a little. I think there was part of me that wanted her to feel what I felt, left behind, confused, unable to understand the world that someone you love has chosen to inhabit. My parents adapted. They were good at adapting. They began asking me to email them updates instead of calling because I was always so busy. They stopped expecting me to come home for anything other than the holidays. They took pride in telling people what I did for work, even though they didn't understand it. My mother would say, "Olivia works in marketing for a big tech company," with a kind of pride in her voice that made me feel both seen and completely invisible at the same time. Years moved forward. I was 33 years old and had everything I thought I'd wanted. I had an apartment with a view. I had a job with a good salary. I had a social circle of people who got me, who understood ambition and success the way I did. I had freedom from the constraints of my small hometown. I had independence. I had built a life that looked, from the outside, like a perfect expression of everything I'd said I wanted. The truth is, and this is what I'm struggling to say even now, sitting in this room with 18 years of distance behind me, I wasn't happy. I was accomplished. I was independent. I was free. But happy? I wasn't sure I knew what that was anymore. I was lonely in a way that I couldn't articulate to anyone, because how do you explain loneliness when you're surrounded by people all the time? How do you explain feeling empty when your life looks full? I was lonely in my apartment despite having people over for dinner parties. I was lonely at work despite being well liked and respected. I was lonely in my relationships despite being close to people. It was like I was watching my own life from the outside, observing it, noting all the ways it was supposed to be fulfilling, and feeling nothing. I remember one night, it was about 6 months ago, so this past April, I was at dinner with a group of colleagues. We were at a fancy restaurant in the downtown area. The restaurant had been written up in magazines. It was impossible to get a reservation. I'd managed to secure a table for my team, and we were celebrating a big client win. Everyone was happy. Everyone was drinking expensive wine and eating perfectly plated food. The conversation was witty and smart, and exactly the kind of conversation I'd always wanted to have. And I was sitting there, my wine glass in my hand, and I suddenly thought, I don't know any of these people. These are the people I spend more time with than anyone else in the world, and I don't actually know them. That thought sat with me. It stayed with me after dinner when I went home to my beautiful apartment with the view. It stayed with me the next morning when I woke up and got ready for work. It stayed with me for weeks. Last spring, May to be exact, my father had a heart attack. I got the call while I was in a meeting. I was in the conference room at work, presenting a digital strategy to a client. I was mid-sentence, explaining the projected engagement metrics for a new campaign, when my phone buzzed. I silenced it. The meeting was important. The client was important. I would check my phone after, but something made me look at it anyway. I glanced down, and I saw my mother's name in the notifications. My mother doesn't call during my workday. She knows I'm busy. We have an understanding that she'll text me if it's urgent, and I'll call her back later. I excused myself from the meeting. I said I had to take a call. I stepped out into the hallway and called her back, and her voice was small in a way I'd never heard it before. Not weak, my mother has never been weak, but small, like she'd made herself smaller to fit through the phone line to reach me across those 6 hours of distance. "It's your father," she said. "We're at the hospital. He had a heart attack. They're saying it's stable. They're saying it was a minor one, but Livy, he's in the hospital. He's okay, but he's in the hospital." I remember the world tilting. I remember my brain trying to process this information like it was a foreign language. My father, heart attack, hospital. These things didn't go together in my mind. My father was 67, but he seemed younger. He was strong. He worked with his hands every day. He didn't have health problems. I said I would come, and I meant it. But I also did what I always do. I told myself I would come at a convenient time, maybe the following weekend once I'd cleared my schedule. I had a project deadline. I had the client presentation to finish. I had a team that depended on me. I had meetings scheduled. I had a life that felt immovable at the time, though I can't even remember what most of it was now. It all seems so small. "When can you get here?" My mother asked. "This weekend," I said. "I'll come this weekend. Is he stable? Is he going to be okay?" "He's stable," she said. "The doctors say it was minor, that he should make a full recovery. But Livy, he's scared, and I'm scared, and I want you here." I said I would come this weekend. That was 4 days away. My mother called again the next day. Not with news. My father was still stable, still recovering normally, still doing all the things the doctors told him to do, but just to talk. She didn't ask me to come earlier. She didn't make me feel guilty or manipulate me. She was just telling me about the hospital, about how they were keeping him for observation for a few more days, about how he kept trying to get up and do things when he was supposed to be resting. He wanted to know how his projects were going. He wanted to call clients and tell them he'd be delayed. He wanted to take care of things. My mother had to keep telling him to stay in bed. "He's worried about people," she said. "He keeps worrying about people who are waiting for him to finish their work. He's lying in a hospital bed after a heart attack, and he's worried about his customers." And I remember hearing that, and something in my chest shifted. Something cracked just slightly in the armor I'd built. "Mom," I said, "I'm coming home today." There was a pause. I could hear her breathing. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I don't want to pull you away from work. I know how busy you are." "I'm coming," I said. "Give me 4 hours. I'm driving down now." I hung up the phone, went back into the conference room and told my boss that my father had a heart attack and I needed to take a personal leave. I didn't elaborate. I didn't explain. I just gathered my things and left. The drive was 6 hours, not 4. I'd underestimated how long it would take to get out of the city, and then there was traffic on the highway. But I drove fast anyway. I drove with the kind of single-mindedness I usually reserved for work, watching the landscape change as I got further away from the city. The skyscrapers gave way to suburbs, which gave way to smaller towns, which eventually gave way to fields. I hadn't been back to my hometown in 3 years. 3 years. Let me say that again because I need you to understand the weight of it. 3 years since I'd driven down Main Street. 3 years since I'd smelled the particular combination of spring air and soil that comes from a town surrounded by farmland. 3 years since I'd pulled into the driveway and seen my parents' faces in person. 3 years of distance, of phone calls and emails, of pretending that I didn't miss them, that I didn't wonder about them, that I didn't sometimes lie awake in my apartment and think about my mother's laugh or my father's habit of humming while he worked. I didn't recognize how much I'd missed it until I was back in it. As I drove through the town, things looked the same but felt different. The diner was still there, Rosie's, with the same pink and white exterior. The hardware store was still there. The traffic lights still blinked red and yellow at the intersection of Main and Elm, but I was seeing it through different eyes now. I wasn't seeing a place that was confining me. I was seeing a place that had been waiting for me. I pulled up to my parents' house around 5 p.m. The house was a Cape Cod-style home that my father had renovated when I was a child. He'd torn out walls, added windows, refinished the original hardwood floors. It was a beautiful house built with his own hands. I'd spent so many years wanting to escape from within those walls, and suddenly I was parking my car in the driveway and feeling something that I can only describe as coming home. My mother came out of the house before I'd even fully stepped out of the car. She was smaller than I remembered, though I'm sure she hadn't actually changed in 3 years. It's just that I'd held her in my mind a certain way, and the reality of her actual physical form, her actual presence, was both exactly what I expected and somehow completely surprising. She pulled me into a hug, and I smelled her, and something in me broke open. I don't know how else to describe it. It was like something locked was finally opening. Some door that I'd sealed shut a long time ago was suddenly swinging wide. "He's going to be fine," she said, holding me tight. "The doctors are very optimistic. He's stable. He's going to be fine." "Can I see him?" I asked. "He's sleeping," she said. "We just got back from the hospital a few hours ago. The doctor said he needed rest, and he finally agreed. He's been asking about you all day." We went inside, and the house smelled exactly like I remembered, like my mother's cooking and my father's woodworking, like the combination of our lives lived together. I went upstairs to the master bedroom and looked at my father sleeping in the bed I'd born to, and I felt something shift in my understanding of what it means to be a child, of what it means to be loved. I stayed for 3 weeks. I called my boss on the second day and told him I wasn't coming back for a while. I didn't know how long a while was. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew that I wasn't leaving. The first week was about recovery. My father came home from the hospital on the 3rd day, and he was frustrated and bored and trying too hard to do things he wasn't supposed to be doing. He wanted to go to his workshop. He wanted to call clients. He wanted his life to go back to normal immediately. My mother had to be firm with him, which I'd never seen before. I'd always seen her be gentle and accommodating, but with him, after the heart attack, she was firm. "You're resting," she said. "That's not negotiable. The doctor said rest, and you're going to rest." My father looked at me like I might take his side, but I didn't. I looked at him and I saw him the way I imagine my mother sees him. Not as a force of nature who could do anything, but as a person, a human being, someone who was mortal and vulnerable and necessary to my survival in ways I hadn't fully comprehended until I thought I might lose him. "She's right," I said. "You're resting." During this first week, I helped my mother with the house. I cleaned, I cooked, I did laundry, I did all the things that I'd been doing for myself in my apartment. But this time it felt different. This time it wasn't just maintaining a space, it was taking care of people I loved. My mother and I fell into a rhythm. We'd wake up early and I'd help her make breakfast. My father wasn't allowed to have much. The doctors wanted him on a low-sodium diet, which was basically cardboard with the occasional vegetable. But my mother made the food with care, the way she did everything. She didn't make my father feel like he was eating punishment food. She made it taste good. She made it feel like a gift. One morning, while we were making eggs, she was telling me about the last 3 years. She was telling me about my father's business, which had picked up significantly. He'd been doing restoration work on historical homes and he'd become somewhat well known for it. He'd been turning down jobs because he didn't have time to do them. He was working long hours, and my mother had been worried about his stress levels. "I've been telling him to slow down," she said. "I've been telling him that we don't need the money, that he should work less. But you know how your father is. He doesn't know how to slow down." I was cracking eggs into a bowl and I was thinking about this, about how I'd inherited this from him. This need to always be doing something, always be working, always be building towards something. This inability to rest, to be satisfied with what you had. "I think he was scared," my mother continued, "not consciously, but I think part of him was scared of slowing down, because if he slowed down, he'd have to think about, I don't know, getting older, being mortal, all the things that scare people when they really let themselves think about it." "Are you scared?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. She was stirring something on the stove, moving the spoon in slow circles. "Yes," she said finally. "I'm scared, but I'm also grateful. And I'm angry. I'm angry that it took a heart attack to get my husband and my daughter in the same room for 3 weeks. That landed. I felt it land, felt it burrow into my chest and settle there. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it with a depth that I don't have words for. "Don't apologize to me," my mother said. "Apologize to yourself, maybe. Apologize to the version of you that you left behind here, that you've been running from this whole time." That second week was harder. My father was improving, getting stronger, wanting to do more. And he and I began to actually spend time together, which we hadn't really done in years. Real time, I mean, not the performative time of family visits where you're both performing the roles you're supposed to play. I started going to his workshop with him. He couldn't do heavy work yet, but he could sit and oversee things, could work on plans for projects, could teach me about the work he'd been doing. And he started telling me about the restoration project he'd completed right before his heart attack. It was a Victorian house on the edge of town, owned by a young couple who wanted to preserve its original character while making it livable for a modern family. My father described the work with such passion, such genuine joy. His eyes would light up as he talked about how he'd carefully restored the original hardwood floors, how he'd tracked down authentic hardware for the cabinets, how he'd worked with an architect to preserve the original structure while adding necessary modern elements. It was beautiful work, he said. "I'm proud of it. The clients are happy. They're going to raise their family in that house, and it's a good house. It's a house that will hold them." And I realised I'd never asked him about his work the way I should have. I'd spent so many years dismissing it, thinking it was small, thinking he was wasting his potential. But listening to him talk about it now, I understood that it wasn't small. It was profound. He was building things that would outlast him, that would hold people's lives, that mattered. "I want to see it," I said. "The house, can we go see it?" He looked surprised, but he said yes. And we drove to the other side of town to this beautiful Victorian house, and my father showed me everything. He pointed out the details that he'd restored, the problems he'd solved, the care he'd taken, and I could see why people trusted him. why they waited months for him to have availability, because he didn't just build things or restore things, he put care into every detail. He thought about the people who would live in the spaces he created. He built with love. That afternoon, we sat on the porch of that house, and my father said something that I've been thinking about every day since. I never wanted to be a big name, he said. I never wanted to be famous. I just wanted to do work that I was proud of, work that mattered to the people I was doing it for. And I wanted to do it in a place I loved, with people I loved. I think I figured that out a long time ago, and I think you've been angry at me for figuring that out. I didn't respond at first. I was looking at the house, at the details of the craftsmanship, at the care evident in every board and nail. I wasn't angry at you, I said finally. I was angry at the idea of being contained. I thought that choosing to stay in one place was the same thing as being trapped. And now, my father asked. Now I think maybe I was running from something that wasn't actually chasing me, I said. I think I was running because I thought running was the only way to prove that I was choosing my own life. But maybe choosing your own life doesn't have to mean rejecting everything and everyone from your past. My father put his arm around me and we sat there on that porch, and I felt something settle in me. Not peace, exactly, but a kind of resolution. A sense that I was beginning to understand something that I'd spent half my life trying not to learn. The third week was about reconnection. My father was mostly recovered, able to move around, able to do light work. He was getting frustrated with his doctor's restrictions and my mother's vigilance, and there was this beautiful, subtle comedy to watching my mother manage him. She didn't allow him to push himself, but she did it with such gentleness and such love that he couldn't really complain. I called people from high school. I went to the diner for coffee. I ran into old friends at the grocery store. I was reintroduced to my hometown by the people who had stayed in it. And it was strange because they'd all changed, but also there was this continuity, this sense of these people still being rooted in a way that I wasn't. My best friend from high school was named Sarah. We'd been inseparable for 4 years, and then I'd left, and I'd let her drift away. We tried to stay in touch for the first year or so, and then we just stopped. I'd started a new life and she'd stayed here, and it seemed easier to let the friendship fade than to try to maintain it across that distance. That's something I regret now. I regret it viscerally. When I ran into her at the grocery store, she lit up the way my father's eyes had lit up when talking about his work. She came and hugged me, and I could feel that she was genuinely happy to see me. "Livy," she said, "I heard you were home. How long are you staying?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe for a while. My father had a heart attack." "Oh my God," she said, her face falling. "Is he okay?" "He's going to be fine," I said. But it made me realise, I don't know. It made me realise that I've been away for too long. We made plans to get coffee, and we did. And it was easy in a way that I hadn't expected. We fell back into our old rhythm, the way we used to talk, the way we used to laugh. And she told me about her life. She was a nurse at the hospital in the neighbouring town. She was engaged to a man named Chris. They were thinking about having kids. She loved her job. And it was interesting and real and her own, not small or limited the way I'd once thought about staying in Millbrook would be. She'd made a life here, a good life, a purposeful life. "I always wondered what happened to you," she said. "I wondered if you were happy, if you found what you were looking for in the city." "I don't know," I said. "I thought I did, but I'm not sure I actually knew what I was looking for." "And now?" she asked. "Now I'm trying to figure that out," I said. During my third and final week at home, my mother and I made soup together. It was minestrone, the same soup she'd made when I was sick as a child. She made it when I had the flu, when I had ear infections, when I had childhood illnesses and didn't feel like eating anything else. The soup was warm and comforting. And it was my mother's way of saying, "I'm taking care of you," without having to say the words. I'd forgotten about this soup. I'd spent so many years away from it that it had become something mythical in my mind. Something from my childhood that didn't actually exist in the present. But standing in the kitchen with my mother, watching her prepare the vegetables the way she'd prepared them 1,000 times before, it came back to me. It was exactly the same, and yet I was experiencing it differently. "Do you remember?" my mother said, stirring slowly, moving the wooden spoon in slow circles. "When you were 7 and you had that fever, you threw up all over your favourite dress and you were more upset about the dress than about being sick." I did remember. I had completely forgotten. And then she said it, and suddenly it was there, crystal clear. It was a yellow dress with a white collar, and I'd loved it desperately. I'd wanted to wear it constantly. "I washed that dress so carefully," she continued. "Gentle cycle, special soap. I treated it like it was made of glass. And when you woke up the next morning, it was hanging on your chair, clean and dry. And you put it on, even though you should have been resting, because you wanted to wear your favourite thing." I was standing next to her at the stove, and I could feel tears starting to form, but I didn't say anything. I let her continue. "I never wanted to be the person who made you stay small," she said. "I never wanted to be the thing that held you back. I wanted to give you big dreams. I just didn't realise that big dreams meant you had to leave us. I didn't realise that growing up meant becoming someone I wouldn't recognise." She turned to look at me, and there were tears on her face too, falling silently as she looked at her daughter. "I've missed you so much," she whispered. "Not just these past 3 years. I've missed you since you were 17 years old, since you decided that leaving was the only way to prove that you were choosing your own life. I've watched you build this whole world without us, and I'm proud of you. But I'm also heartbroken, because I think you're heartbroken too, and you just don't know it yet." And I think that's when I understood. I understood it in a way that I couldn't have understood it any other way. I had mistaken leaving for freedom. I had equated distance with independence. I had confused the need to become myself with the need to reject everything about where I came from. And in doing so, I had cut myself off from the people who had loved me first, who had shaped me, who were part of who I was no matter how far I ran. I pulled my mother into a hug, right there in the kitchen, with the soup simmering on the stove, and I held her, and I cried, and for the first time in 18 years, I let myself feel the weight of what I'd been running from, and it wasn't the small town or the limitations or the predictability. It was the love. I'd been running from love because love felt like it was too heavy to carry alongside everything else I wanted to become. We finished making the soup together. We didn't talk much while we worked. We didn't need to. We just moved around the kitchen in this easy rhythm that we'd had before I left, before everything got complicated. We diced vegetables. We added broth. We let it simmer. And by the time my father came in from his workshop, drawn by the smell, the kitchen smelled like home. Not like a place I had to escape from, but like a place that'd been waiting for me. That night, we sat around the dinner table, my parents and me, and we ate the soup. And my father said it was the best soup my mother had made in years. And my mother said it was because I'd helped make it. And my father looked at me and smiled, a real smile, not a performance of a smile, but a genuine expression of joy at having his daughter home. "How long can you stay?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "I haven't really thought about it." "Well," my father said, "think about it. We'd like to have you here, if you want to stay." I called my boss the next day and told him I was taking an extended leave of absence. I said I needed to figure some things out. I didn't tell him that what I needed to figure out was my entire life, the trajectory of it, the meaning of it. I just said I needed time, and he said okay, though I could hear the concern in his voice. In his world, people don't leave their jobs, especially not successful people in the middle of successful careers. But I did. I stayed in Millbrook for another 3 weeks, and then I went back to the city, but I went back different. I gave notice at my job. I told them I would stay for a month to transition my projects, but that I was moving on. I packed up my apartment. I sold most of my furniture. I put most of my belongings in storage, and then I came home. I've been back in Millbrook for 6 months now. What I want to tell you is that this is a story about coming home, about finding peace, about choosing to embrace your past instead of rejecting it. And it is that story, but it's also more complicated than that, because life is more complicated than redemption narratives allow for. The thing is, I'm still ambitious. I still love intellectual stimulation. I still love the energy of cities, the possibility of them, the way they make you feel like anything could happen. I still love my work. I do digital marketing consulting now, which allows me to work remotely, which allows me to work anywhere. I have clients in the city. I have a team. I'm still building something meaningful, still challenging myself, still growing in my career. But I'm doing it from here. I'm doing it while living in my parents' house, sleeping in my childhood bedroom, shopping at the same grocery store I shopped at when I was 17. And here's the thing that I didn't expect. I'm happier. Not happy in the way I thought I'd be happy. Not happy in that triumphant, I've escaped and made something of myself way. But happy in a deeper, more sustainable way. Happy in a way that comes from being seen and known by the people who love me. Happy in a way that comes from continuity and roots and belonging. I've started working with my father too. He's retired now. The heart attack was a wake-up call for him too. But he's mentoring me on a project. I'm using my design skills and his craftsmanship to document and preserve some of the historic homes in our area. We're creating a digital archive with photographs and histories and details about the restoration work that's been done on these homes. It's become this beautiful collaboration between his practical knowledge and my digital expertise. We work together most afternoons, and it's become one of my favourite parts of my week. My mother and I have also become closer. She's still teaching, she didn't retire, but I help her with her lesson planning sometimes. We have dinner together most nights. We've taken up gardening together, which my mother's been doing for years and which I was too cool to learn before. We sit in the garden in the evenings and we talk, and it's the kind of quiet intimacy that I didn't think I wanted, but now can't imagine living without. I'm not going to tell you that everything is perfect now. It's not. There are moments when I feel restless, when I wonder if I made a mistake, when I think about the opportunities I might have missed in the city. There are moments when my parents frustrate me, when I feel the edges of the old suffocation starting to creep back in. But those moments pass, because now I understand what they are. They're not evidence that I made the wrong choice. They're just part of being a human being in relationship with other human beings, which is never perfectly smooth or easy or comfortable. What I've learned is that growing up and growth don't have to mean leaving. Growth can mean deepening. Growth can mean understanding yourself better, understanding your history better, understanding the people you come from better. Growth can mean integrating all the parts of yourself, the ambitious part and the rooted part, the person who wanted to escape and the person who needed to belong. I've also realized something else. I spent so many years running from my parents' love because it felt like it was trying to contain me, but now I understand that I was the one doing the containing. I was the one who decided that their love was incompatible with my dreams. I was the one who created a false choice between ambition and connection. And I spent 18 years living as if that false choice was actually real, when the whole time there was a different option available. The option to be both, to be ambitious and connected, to be independent and rooted, to be my own person and also someone's daughter. My father recovered completely from his heart attack. He's healthy now, though he's more careful about his stress levels and his diet and his need to always be doing something. He and I have become close in a way we weren't before. I think part of that is because he sees himself in me. That drive, that need to always be working on something. And now that we're working on something together, now that my ambition has found an out that also serves the community, he doesn't feel like he's fighting against it anymore. My mother has started planning for her eventual retirement. She says she has maybe 5 more years of teaching left, and then she wants to focus on her garden and her family and the slow, intentional living that she's always wanted to do. And I've committed to being here for that transition, to being present for that chapter of her life. Last week, I was going through some boxes in my closet, the ones I'd kept since college that I never bothered to unpack until I came back home. And I found old journals. I read through them, and I remembered being that teenager who was so certain that she had to leave, that there was nothing for her here, that her real life was waiting somewhere else. and I felt compassion for her for the first time. She went wrong to want more. She was just incomplete in her understanding of what more actually meant. More wasn't a place, more wasn't a job title or a salary or a city apartment. More was a person, a fuller version of myself, someone who could hold both ambition and gratitude, both independence and connection, both her present and her past. More was understanding that leaving and staying aren't opposites. They're both choices, and they're both valid. And sometimes the most important choice is the one to come back. I'm sitting in my childhood bedroom right now, at my desk by the window, looking out at the garden where my mother grows vegetables and flowers. The light is coming through these windows in that particular way it always does in late afternoon, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. And instead of feeling haunted by this room, instead of feeling trapped by it, I feel held by it. The same furniture, the same walls, the same lavender comforter, but I'm seeing it with different eyes. This room contains all the versions of me that came before. The girl who read about cities and dreamed of escape. The teenager who was so desperate to leave that she couldn't see what she was leaving behind. The young woman who spent years proving that she'd made the right choice. The woman who finally realized that she'd been arguing with the wrong version of reality the whole time. And that doesn't frighten me anymore. It just makes me feel like I'm part of something larger than myself. A continuous line of people loving each other across time and distance, across the years when we're together and the years when we're apart. My mother comes from this town, my father comes from this town, their parents came from this town, and now I'm choosing to stay in this town, not because I can't leave, but because I'm choosing to be here. Last month, Sarah and I went to Rosie's Diner for breakfast, the same diner where my mother and I used to go when I was in high school. We sat in the same booth where we always sat, and we ordered the same things we used to order. For me, it was pancakes with blueberries. For Sarah, it was scrambled eggs and toast, and it was like no time had passed at all, and also like everything had changed. "I'm glad you came back," Sarah said, and she meant it. I could hear it in her voice. I'm glad I came back too," I said. "I just wish I hadn't stayed away so long." "You had to go," she said. "You had to leave and do your thing and figure out who you are. But I think that's actually what I was waiting for you to figure it out and then come back." There's something about being seen like that, being understood like that by someone who's known you your whole life. It grounds you. It reminds you that you're not just the person you've become on your own. You're also the person you were, the person you're becoming, the person you are in relation to everyone else. My phone has been buzzing with emails from people who heard I was back in town. Former teachers, neighbours, people who knew my parents, people who knew me. They all said similar things. "Welcome home, we're glad you're here, the town missed you." And it's strange, because these are people who I thought I was escaping from. People who I thought were part of the small life I didn't want. But now I'm realising that they're not limitations. They're connections. They're part of the web of human relationship that holds us up, that makes life meaningful, that reminds us that we're not alone in the world. I've started volunteering at the library, helping with digital literacy classes for seniors. It's not a job that pays. My consulting work pays plenty. But it's meaningful in a way that my previous work wasn't always meaningful. I'm helping people in my community learn skills that will help them connect with their families, access information, stay engaged with the world. I'm using everything I learned in the city and applying it in a context that makes sense to my heart. My father has been talking about writing a book about restoration work, about the philosophy of preserving old things in a world that's always pushing toward the new. He's asked me to help him with it, to help him put his knowledge into words, to help him share what he knows with other people who want to learn. It's a project we're working on together, and it feels significant in a way that my previous projects never did. Here's what I'm trying to say, and I'm not sure I'm saying it right. Life isn't a linear narrative. It's not a story where you leave home, become successful, and then either regret your choices or celebrate them. It's more complicated than that. It's about cycles and returns, and understanding that the person you were is still part of the person you are. It's about learning that growth doesn't require destruction. You don't have to burn down your past in order to build your future. You can integrate them. You can hold both. I'm 35 years old now, and I'm living in my childhood home in a small town, and I'm happier than I've ever been. Not because I gave up my ambitions or my dreams, but because I finally understood that my ambitions and dreams didn't have to be in opposition to my love for my family, my love for my hometown, my need for roots and continuity and belonging. There's a phrase I've been thinking about a lot. The unexamined life is not worth living. But I think there's something equally true. The unlived life is not worth examining. There are so many ways to live, so many valid choices, so many paths that can lead to meaning and fulfillment. And sometimes the most courageous path isn't the one that takes you as far away as possible. Sometimes it's the path that brings you back to where you started, but with new eyes, new understanding, new gratitude. If you've made it this far in this story, I want to thank you. Thank you for sitting with me in this moment, for listening to the messy, complicated truth of what it means to grow up and grow away, and then hopefully grow back toward the people who have always known how to love you. Thank you for letting me share this with you. I want to ask you something gently, without any pressure. Is there someone in your life who you've been keeping at a distance? Someone whose love has felt like it was too small for your ambitions, or whose life choices have made you feel like you had to reject them in order to become who you wanted to be? Someone you've outgrown, or thought you had to outgrow? I'm not saying the answer is always to go back, but I am saying that the answer might not be to stay gone forever either. Sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is not to leave, but to return. To return with our whole selves, all the complicated versions of who we are, and say, I understand now. I understand what you were offering me. I understand that your love wasn't meant to contain me, it was meant to sustain me. And I'm grateful. I'm so grateful. I'm also saying this, if you're in the phase of life where you feel like you have to leave, where you feel like your hometown or your family or your past is holding you back, that's valid too. Leave if you need to leave. Go and become who you need to become. Build the life you dream of. But do it with the knowledge that leaving doesn't have to be permanent, that coming back doesn't mean failure, that integration is possible, that you don't have to choose between being yourself and being part of a community. You can be both. My mother just knocked on the door and asked if I wanted tea. I said yes. And I meant it in a way that I don't think I ever meant yes before. Not as an obligation, not as a role I had to play, but as a genuine choice made by someone who has finally figured out that being here, being present, being part of this life is not a consolation prize for not becoming something big, is the something bigger. It is the whole thing. If this story touched something in your heart, don't forget to leave a small whisper in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts about family, about coming home, about the version of yourself that you thought you had to leave behind. Tell me about your journey. Tell me where you've been and where you are now. Tell me if you're thinking about coming home, or if you're thinking about leaving, or if you're somewhere in between and you're not sure what you're supposed to do. And if you'd like to listen to more stories like this, stories about the quiet revolutions of the human heart, stories about learning to love yourself and the people who raised you in more integrated ways, just stay close. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I've finally learned that staying somewhere, truly staying, is its own kind of freedom. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for letting me share this part of my life with you. With gratitude and a full heart, Olivia.